Welcome to First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. I'm your host, James Gardner, certified athletic therapist, certified strength and conditioning specialist, yoga instructor, human being. This platform, for the pros, by the pros, anybody in the performance space, and beyond. Welcome here to share in the stories of professionals, experiences, journeys, learning along the way. It's a platform to connect, to network, and to be a part of a community that cares, with conversations that matter, experiences that resonate, and generate ideas, thought-provoking, organic dialogue, passionate pros. Brought to you as always by First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, and Benchmark Athletics, in association with the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. It's First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. Thanks for being here. Thank you for being a part of it.
Welcome to First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy roundtable brought to you by First Star Therapy. I'm your host, James Gardner, and this is a platform for the pros, by the pros. Passionate pros, organic dialogue. Let's chat. Thanks for listening. Let's roll.
All right, and we're rolling here. First Star Let's Chat, session 52, an athletic therapy roundtable. Tonight's guest is Richard DeMont. He's currently at Concordia University. Before we get into his bio and into this conversation that I have no doubt will be enriching and leave us wanting more and learning plenty, I wanted to wish everybody happy holidays, best of the season. Obviously, tumultuous times, a different festive season upon us. So wishing everybody well. For everybody who's here this evening, thank you for being here live. Richard, thank you for your time carving this into your Sunday night. Everybody who's picking this up afterwards on the podcast and YouTube channel, really appreciate the support and paying attention to these conversations. I think is beginning to make a difference. Plenty of good feedback, plenty of opportunity to get caught up or network or get to know some of the leaders in our field and in the integrated performance space. And tonight, without a doubt, another amazing guy who is an athletic therapist and an athletic trainer as well. But before we get to that, let's go through the ground rules. If you have any questions for Richard or for myself this evening, please feel free to type those into the chat box. I will filter those over to Richard towards the end, last 5 or 6 minutes or so. As always, these sessions are brought to you by First Star Therapy and our primary sponsor, Mobility Tape, the only heat-activated kinesiology tape on the market. If you haven't tried it, no time like the present, feel free to reach out with any questions you might have about that product. I am happy to answer those. J at Mobility Tape on Instagram at MT Mobility Tape. More than happy to answer any questions on that product. So here we go. Session 52, second to last of 2020. Sunday night. Richard DeMont is certified by the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association, the CATA, as an athletic therapist. He also holds the certified credential from the National Athletic Trainers Association as an ATC. That's the American certification. Richard currently serves as the athletic therapy program director at Concordia University. In his career, he's won writing awards from the Journal of Athletic Training and from the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association for his work in muscle function of lower extremities in dynamic conditions. And he's also served as the CATA President for 3 terms. We are in good company tonight, plenty to learn. Some of Richard's research interests: he is the Director of Athletic Therapy Research in a laboratory form. His focus of research is on the neuromuscular system as it relates to injury, prevention, and rehabilitation. Specifically, the role of pre-activation as a form of dynamic joint stability has been and is examined. He's explored additional aspects of this theme, examining effects of cognitive distraction on neuromuscular control and musculoskeletal loading when exposed to whole body vibration. Specific to the injury prevention theme, current projects involve investigation of children's development of physical skill and movement, which can be applied to injury prevention strategies. Richard DeMont, Concordia University, thank you so much for being here. A pleasure to have you aboard.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Quite an honor. Yeah, I look back through your list and I've listened to some of your conversations, which have been fantastic, and it's quite a list of people. So I'm pretty happy to be counted among them.
No, it's my pleasure and our pleasure. And I was just, we had the opportunity to connect a little bit through the fall and through Concordia and doing some work back and forth. And I was just reading through your bio again and in preparing for having this discussion with you. I am humbled by the fact that you would come on and talk to us and share your story. There's a lot of good that comes from these conversations, and I'm not even deserving to be in the ring, to be quite honest. But let's throw this out there, and we'll see where we go. Would love to learn plenty more about what's going on at Concordia, how things may have shifted over time. Definitely in the COVID space, you and I have talked about that a little bit. Things look different, but more so would love to start with sort of where athletic therapy became a little bit clearer for you along your path, where it started and how you got to where you got to now, and then we'll veer off as we see fit.
Okay. Well, my introduction to athletic therapy was actually not from an athletic therapist, but sort of one of the old school trainers, as we might say. He was actually an army medic in the British military way back. He's since passed now. At my undergraduate degree at St. Francis Xavier in Nova Scotia. And I was doing a physical education degree. And as we know, a lot of the AT programs, both in Canada and the United States, started in physical education, human kinetics, kinesiology, whatever term we want to use at different institutions. And it was just a chance to be sort of involved. I certainly wasn't a good enough athlete that I was playing any sports. So I jumped in and started to help him a little bit. And that was good and fine. And enjoyed it. And so then I actually did a little teaching in that first year after graduating. And then thought, that AT thing was kind of fun. I was working with the athletes and I enjoyed it. And so then I found a program. It was Sheridan. So I went there and it was a 2-year program at the time. And enjoyed it immensely. I think I did fairly well. I had a little bit of experience, which was helpful for me to get through the rigor of that program. And then I went back to St. FX. This guy, Johnny Pike, who was the Army medic, was retiring or had retired or something. And I said, hey, I've done this program and how about you let me come there and do it? And so I did that for a couple of years. And I was teaching sort of what they called the care and prevention class, which is sort of an introductory AT class, do some taping of some ankles, sort of at the level for a physical education teacher, just to, have a little bit of skill just to try to help out, in the day and age when an AT is not available for high school sports. It would be great if it was across the board, but it's not yet. So even that's still a helpful skill for a physical education teacher. At any rate, they said to me, well, this is university and we really need to have somebody have a master's degree to teach this class. So, we're not gonna let you teach this class anymore. And I was like, well, what if I go get a master's degree? How about I do that and figure out how to do that and come back and then I can still teach the class. And so we negotiated kind of back and forth a little bit. And they said, well, we'll save your job for you for this amount of time. If you can go do that and get back, then that'll work out. So I did that. I went to Indiana State, where a lot of Canadians actually did some graduate work in athletic training in the United States under, Ken Knight and Bob Benke and Chris Ingersoll. And came back and, worked a little while longer at St. FX. And then I sort of thought to myself, that was kind of fun at ISU. I kind of got a little bit of a research bug and thought, well, how else could my career go? I was enjoying it immensely at St. FX. I thought it was fantastic. I enjoyed working with the athletes. The coaches were great. It was a nice little small town, Nova Scotia. I'm from Nova Scotia. It was fantastic. But I thought there might be something more, where was I going to grow? How was I going to, progress through the profession a little bit? And so then I decided that I was going to go give my hand a try at the PhD. So I went to University of Pittsburgh and did my PhD there. And then, there weren't very many academic jobs available in Canada. And so one popped up at Concordia and I thought, well, let me throw my hat in the ring and see what happens. And I got the job and here I am 21 years later. So It's been a ride. Yeah.
Yeah, and making a difference every year, and you get to see students, and students get to see you, and I think this is part of the conversation that I love to get into with you as well, is like, have students changed, or if not, or if they have, how have they changed through your course of time there? But before we get to that, how did you feel the education and the experience at Indiana State and Pittsburgh translated over when you came back to Canada? Obviously, sports have a heightened I don't want to say value, but they're highlighted in a different way in the US in those big schools. And then we come back to Canada and it's not quite the same thing. The application of the education obviously still can cross borders, but did you notice any drastic differences? Did you pick up on things there that you might not be able to use or would use when you came back to Canada?
Um, well, the professions obviously have a huge overlap, between the American education system and practice,
Mhm.
and the Canadian one. There are definitely some differences. I didn't quite get the same. I mean, sports is so much bigger in the U.S. There's no question about it, and like working with some big Division I football teams or basketball teams, would be quite an experience, I'm sure. I didn't get that experience. My they At the AT program at ISU, it's actually an AT preparatory program. So like there's AT content as well as a splash of research built into that. And so I actually worked at a high school, Terre Haute South. There are two, Terre Haute had north and a south, and you might as well be, Pittsburgh Steelers or Pitt University of Pittsburgh in West Virginia or something, like, crosstown rivals, north and south, just and Friday night lights, right? Like the big game on Friday night, of course. And that was an eye-opening experience. It was just to see the people that came out, and there were, three of us. The other two people that I worked with at Terre Haute South were certified in the United States. I wasn't certified in the United States at that point in time. Uh, and I don't even really remember what we exchanged so much. We exchanged language. We spoke a different way. We did things a little bit differently. Um, but there was really a whole lot more overlap than there were differences. And so, they might do some taping a little bit differently, or some stretching a little bit differently, or some warm-ups a little bit differently. But it wasn't anything so extravagant that I noticed a difference. I did notice a difference in the profession, in that there was certainly a much more sports, or as you said, much more of a sports oriented focus for the ATs in the United States. Certainly, the athletics portion of it was important. The athletic portion of it is important for us too in Canada. I mean, that serves as the basis for what we've done, and how we act. But yet there's, because of the because of the diminished, compared to the United States, emphasis on sports, we work more clinically. We probably do more manual therapy, although I think they're coming along on that line quite well. And so sort of just because of our expanding workplaces, not our traditional workplaces like colleges and universities, we've had to sort of have a little different kind of a focus rather than the pure kind of sport focus. And so maybe those were some of the differences that I noticed at first.
Yeah, no, and just identifying some of those and making those relatable and sort of sharing your experience goes a long way. A large number of our listeners are in the US now. Some of them have dreamt of going from Canada to the US for professional sport, or into the GA ship, or, the graduate studies in the US. So any experience that you're sharing is valuable. And obviously it's led to where you got to today, which is incredibly valuable, not only for yourself but for everybody else that's listening, and sort of to navigate that in Canada. You work in a space now in Concordia with students on a regular basis. I had the opportunity to overlap with you, come into your class virtually this fall, and sort of talk about, do this, have this conversation with your students, and just to provide a different voice. When you're talking with students these days, is there much difference than, I don't want to say maybe not 20 years ago, but 10 years ago or 5 years ago, in terms of where they're coming from or what their angle is when they're finishing up school? You just touched on sort of the broadening of our scope of practice. Athletics was the basis, but now it's in sort of non-traditional space as well, which I think is amazing as I start to navigate these conversations further and go back and listen to and interact with lots of people from different places. Has that changed for you working with students? Is there different thought processes in place or different angles within the ideology of the students as they move towards graduation and certification?
Yeah. The students are always pretty smart. They keep you on your toes, which is a good thing. And I think that as more information is available, as we refine that information, as we develop new information and new ideas and new thoughts, and expand our research and other areas. I think and then the availability of that and their ability to access that is pretty phenomenal. And so I think that portion of the students has changed a little bit in that they're I don't want to say that they're they kind of ask the same kind of questions as they always have. Maybe I'm getting a little bit better at explaining things. Hopefully I am over the years, but maybe I'm not. I don't know. They, but they can find information, and they can find information quickly. The number of students, well, of course, that have cell phones in their hands in class. Well, hopefully they're not, just texting in class, but, they've got laptops that they take note on. They expect notes to be provided for them. That's all good and fine. I've provided notes right from the very beginning. I think that's been a long tradition, in academia. But they've got them there, and they can, they can look things up quickly. They can take notes on their computer. They can access a few other things, while they're doing that. I don't know if they're better multitaskers or not, but that technology has entered into the classroom a little bit. And of course, this semester it entered into it quite a bit, because this is, this format here is how we did our classes. As you noted when you came into one of my classes this semester, and thanks again for doing that. So but at heart, they're still the same. They want to know. They want to get as much information as they can. They typically want to progress faster than perhaps quite they're ready. Everyone's at a little different speed. That's reasonable. But people always just sort of, they just want a little bit more, and so, which is great. But I sort of have a caution inside of me that sort of says, well, let's just do it in this order to make sure you understand why we're doing it. It's a big thing philosophically for me to make sure that the why is understood. It's not just do this at this time, but why do we do this at this time? Because then that helps to solidify that information so that a young therapist who's entering into the professional world can make a better informed decision about why they might do something or why they might not do something in a particular situation.
Yeah, I think this is a great jumping off point to sort of go down a rabbit hole and see what happens. But the delivering on the why and understanding that, I think, is obviously crucial. And I love that's sort of front and center for you. You talked about like the access to information and getting access to it quickly and then having it all. And then we talk about, maybe a desire to progress a little quicker. And there's so much out there in social media and other avenues to come get this skill, come get this certification, come do this. You can do it if you're a student, no problem. And then you'd bring that back to your academic place, and it's sort of like, how does this fit in? If I'm 3 steps ahead of the cart, then it's not, it may be problematic. So how do you balance that as somebody who oversees a program that's based in development and moving therapists towards certification and professionalism in this space? How do you sort of, I don't want to say stem that, but how do you navigate that as an educator?
Yeah, it's certainly tricky at times. We have conversations in our educational group at Concordia. And, sometimes we've had the conversation before, well, are we trying to get people to pass the exam, or are we trying to get them to be good therapists? And The question's gotten asked several times over the years, and by a close friend of mine who I work with, and it kind of drives me crazy in a little ways, because I'm like, well, why can't we do both? Why
Mhm.
can't we prepare people and understand what they need to know for the certification exam, but also help them become great athletic therapists as they transition into practice. So it is tricky. How you balance those things. But I don't think those two things are exclusive. That's for sure. I remember, back in the day when I was a student, I wanted to do that too. Like, it's not that, I don't think that phenomenon has changed. I wanted to, like, well, I should go take that class. Will they let me take it? And my instructors at the time were like, there's a time and a place, and just like, make sure you've got the basics, make sure you understand why you're doing this, and then progress and get those additional skills. And it's good advice, and I still would follow that advice. If someone asked me, I'd give them that advice as well. um, we so what happens at Concordia, and probably a lot of the other programs, all of the other programs, is they students go off to internships or placements or stage or whatever we call them. And they're learning, they take what they learn from Concordia and the other schools, and they go to that location and they apply that. But then something happens, someone gets hurt, it's a unique injury, it might be something that they haven't seen. They get a chance to take their information and apply it in that unique experience, which is great. But then they've got the influence of the supervisor. And so then the supervisor has, depending on their experience, a wealth of experience and different skills and different tools in the toolbox, so to speak, and are doing things, and the student, curious, wants to know, and starts to learn some of those things. And that's great. Like, I don't have a problem with that. But again, it sort of is the different pathways that students can take. And so when we come back to class, and back to our labs, we sort of have to say, okay, this is what we're doing in the lab, this is what we're doing in the class. And I'm sure most instructors at most institutions have gotten a question like, well, at my internship, I saw this particular thing, and how does that apply here? And, that enriches the conversation, but can also distract it a little bit as well. And so for all of us in sort of the academic world, we have to find the balance there that says, okay, well, let's go down this pathway a little bit, or let's not, or the rest of the class isn't ready for this, or maybe they are, and hey, this is a great opportunity to teach some of that particular skill, especially if it fits into the course. There's definitely a balance there. I try to lead our group into a sort of a, this is what we need to do. These are how we're going to go through the plans. And, there's been people that, laboratory instructors at Concordia that have been there longer than I have. They know what they're doing. They're well skilled, so we don't have a big conversation often about, oh, the students are trying to do something else out of the, we're, out of the scope of that particular class. Like, we don't have to rein anybody in, because they're pretty well versed in it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think this is a great talking point and a very thorough answer. And I love that they're not exclusive to one another, and that we can sort of build them in, so long as we keep coming back to that central piece, right? I'm use the why as a central piece, and then the foundation for me is always one that I'm talking with athletes on. Is like, if we spend way too much time on the foundation, that's never going to be a bad thing. And so if the foundation is solid, then we can build as high as we want, in terms of that analogy and all kinds of things. If it's thin, we get into some trouble down the road at some point, right? When the weather changes, or the movement changes, or the opponent changes, or whatever might happen in sport. So
Yeah.
no, a brilliant share.
Yeah. And within that, it doesn't mean we just stay at the foundation either, right? Like,
Right.
we can go off on our different pathways, and have these conversations, and, have the instructors or the internship supervisors, tell the story. I was like, well, when I saw this that time, and I'll tell you, I'll make a little plug, I guess, but what the institutions have been working towards and have been progressing and are well entrenched now is sort of this competency-based education component. And, we've redone, there's been a group that has redone the competencies within the CATA to say, this is what we need to be able to do in sort of a specific way to write that language. And all the institutions are following it. And so that that helps to set that foundation and set that level of what's to be expected. And so, we can come in as a groups at Concordia, or the other institutions would do the same, and sort of say, okay, here are the things that we need to teach. How are we going to do this? How are we going to measure that a student has got that? And if the student has got that, then we're setting them up to, pass the certification exam, but also to have that grounding competency that they can then use once they transition into professional practice.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And for anything that it's worth, all on board when that sort of shift started happening towards that, putting a little bit more emphasis on the educational institutions that are with the students for 3 to 4 years, as opposed to just getting out and having one day, one exam to determine whether or not somebody's ready. So I'm on board with that. And that's my opinion. That's neither here nor there. But that move, I think, makes for exactly what you've touched on already. You've been there for a while. So speaking of some of the things that you've been doing in the academic space, your current projects with your research, where has that taken you currently with your projects in terms of what you have on the go right now? I love hearing from the academic side of we had Lorianne Hines on a couple of weeks ago. She was talking about, cerebrohemodynamics, and I had to go and, obviously use Google or like Wikipedia to figure out what that meant, but jump through that and really, I kid. But anyway, just to navigate that space, where is your research at these days? I love hearing about it. I think it's great for our profession and others to hear that research is ongoing, obviously.
Yeah, well, Lorianne's a pretty smart woman, so I'm not sure I'm going to use big words like that. But what I've been trying to focus on, you had a pretty good handle on actually with the introduction. Thank you. I've always been interested in people being able to stabilize their joints, through just muscle action. We can go back over the years and see where people have not been able to do this and got into non-contact injuries. ACL is the classic example, but it happens at other joints as well. And so that sort of was to speak about foundation, that was where the foundation came from me. And, but I mentioned earlier the physical education background that I had, when I first sort of got the taste of AT in my undergraduate degree. And so that sort of resurfaced a little bit as I was working through the dynamic stability components. And I went to a couple talks. Actually, there was one really great talk at a Winnipeg conference about physical literacy. And I went to another one at our local CTSQ conference. And at both of them, the people that were speaking, intelligent, well-meaning guys who were talking about physical literacy for children, which is the motivation and the confidence to be able to move and to move well in a physically competent way, and sort of some other subvariants of that, and they kind of indicated, and they said, this is going to be great. It's and one of the benefits is reduced injury. And let's back that up just a little bit and tell me again how you thought that happened. And so after the CTSQ meeting, it was with a guy named David Arsenault, who runs a foundation, Champions for Life, here in Montreal, and he's done tremendous stuff in a lot of elementary schools. And I got talking to him about this, like, this is what I'm interested in. And we've got these, we understand this paradigm about contracting muscle, sort of ahead of, in preparatory phase, sort of ahead of its need. And that can, that just that little bit, if 100 milliseconds prior to some force landing, at that joint, we can stabilize the joint a little bit better. And as we do that, we have some intervention programs that are getting quite popular in terms of lower extremity prevention, at least at that point in time. And they involve things like balance and dynamic motion and positioning of the body and applying forces in sort of unexpected perturbation methodologies. And so we can train the body to be a little bit better at that. But like, what's missing that some people don't have this kind of already, so not everyone is getting non-contact injuries, but there's enough of them that happen that, like, is there a subset of people that are in this category, or like, can we do something earlier, like, so that children in this case are learning as they mature and start to have some of these movement patterns in sort of safe ways that we would expect them to at least reduce the likelihood or chance of having an injury. Anyway, that kind of got me off the path a little bit. But what I did was I started a sort of collaboration with David Arsenault to start to measure children and how they were moving. And he had a tool that he was using with 5 to 8 year olds that he had developed, and it was based on physical literacy. And that was good. I worked with him to validate that as a tool and to measure some children and measure the impact of his program. And his program, they improved in the skill like 30%, whereas the control group only improved by 10%, and they would anyway, probably because of just practicing, running around in free play and getting better at skills anyway and growing. And then what I wanted to do was sort of take from that 5 to 8 year old and then progress through the 9 to 12s as they started to get into sort of puberty, and see if that that physical literacy element of things could improve movement capacity in children that then they take into their teenage years. And maybe wouldn't it be awesome if we could render the prevention programs obsolete? Not that we probably ever would, but like, wouldn't it be great if we could lessen the need of them, let's say? So I sort of started down that path of trying to develop some tools that would be good for that age group. And we came up with a thing called the Child First, which is a focused injury risk screening tool. We've validated it. So basically I did a project where I got a bunch of experts that were interested in physical literacy and injury as well, and said, okay, what kind of skills do children need to do to get better at movement capacity, but in a safe way? So like, to avoid, a knee valgus when they're running and jumping and landing, as an example, and other elements, through their body when they're running, when they're leaping, when they're jumping, when they're landing, kind of skills. And so we got that tool, and we developed that tool, tested to make sure it was reliable, and are now in the process of collecting a bunch of data for, we're including 8-year-olds, so 8 to 12-year-old children to participate in this study and see how well they perform on that tool, to sort of measure what the norms are, what kind of expectations do we have, maybe, between boys and girls, or between the ages, or between what other involvement in sport, organized or play, that they have. So we can sort of establish what that norm would be within that tool. Mm-hmm. And we're also tracking some injuries that they have, to sort of see if we can start to relate back to see if we can really call this an injury risk, assessment of some sort, because we can relate it back to how they get injured later in life.
Right. No, it's amazing. And the work is amazing stuff. I spend some time now, since sort of leaving Canada and coming back in these past couple of years, in the amateur space, and down in like this, like watching kids and seeing kids move. It's amazing how it changes, but also the overemphasis when we get into organized sport. And this sort of like hyper condensing and specialization that's happening sort of seemingly earlier and earlier. And I'm not sure that the screening piece is being done as the hours and the on ice time and the on court time and all these other things are ramping up and up and up and up and up. I'm not sure that the screening is held to a high value, or if there is anything that's being used universally. So maybe this becomes something down the road when you collate the information and you gather all of this stuff, that it becomes a tool that is relied upon. I find the specialization, it makes sense in some years in some sports, but at the early ages, there's a lot of things missing. And this sounds like a great tool that a lot of amateur level organizations need to get on board with. And you talk about what I would refer to like NMT programs as well, like neuromuscular training programs. You talk about setting up joint stability. And I also look at this now for, I think probably the past little while as well, is like looking at this long term. Like, what is this doing right now in this moment? What is this setting you up for in your teenage years? And then now working with high level pro athletes. And it's like, okay, what kind of work can I give you right now that can enhance not only what you're doing now, but can empower you to be more stable when you're done your career as well. Like, your hip is a mess because of what you've been doing for the past 13 years competitively. What can we be doing right now to stabilize the joint, mobilize spaces that you need access to in your current sport, but also in life? So, fall prevention and some of these other things. So I think coming back around to that front end is amazing. And I can't wait to see some of the results. And I would love to connect with you in the future, as I'm sure many of the listeners would as well, with David and the Champions for Life and the Child First and all of these programs that you're developing. It sounds amazing, sounds great. And I would encourage anybody who's interested in the amateur space to reach out to Richard and or David if Richard's so willing to do so, as I'm sure you are. So
Sure.
as we come with all that time you have.
On that note,
Yeah.
by all means, if you've got a child that's 8 to 12, male or female, the boy or girl, doesn't matter. We'd be happy to use our tool and assess on some of the skills that we assess on, and give you a little report about that and why some of the movement parameters that we are talking about are helpful, and so that a parent can guide their children perhaps a little bit better. So I would mention that. You can find me on the Concordia webpage, richard.demont@concordia.ca. Pretty easy to find.
Yeah, beautiful.
And I do hope to be able to blend this a little bit with that sports specialization, which is why we're taking some of the, what kind of activities are they doing and how often do they do them, and whether it's organized or not, because that sports specialization component is really becoming important in that. I think it's not reaching the parents well enough yet, that they are not recognizing that they're not improving their chances of their son making it to the NBA or the NHL or whatever other MBL, whatever professional sport you want. They're probably not doing that. The odds are not in their favor, but the odds are in their favor of setting their children up for some injury. So that's another important piece of this puzzle. It's not the direct focus of this tool, but it plays into it. And some of the skills that we're learning and the way that you frame that, to that pathway through life, is a big element of that. And it is based on that long-term athlete development that we've seen before, sort of how children are learning and playing, and how they progress their training, and, then train to win, and then be, active through the rest of their lives, kind of thing. So it all fits together.
Yeah, awesome. And are your tools accessible like in COVID? Are you remote? Can this be done remotely currently?
You bet.
As it stands? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. They had to, the whole university shut down, right?
Everybody,
So
yeah.
okay, well, how can we do this? So we can do it two ways. We've got instructions where a parent can videotape, just use your phone, videotape the child doing the specific activities with the instructions that we've given you. And upload it, and we'll assess it and email you back, kind of thing. And then the other way is a live methodology. So, you're there with your child and I'm there, and I say, okay, this is how we're going to do this. Go ahead and do it. And, the camera's got to be back enough that we can watch your child do the specific movement pattern. And then we score it, we mark it, and we assess it. And then then we get back to you. So we can do both of those all online. Yeah. All, video. Yeah. It's awesome.
Amazing. That's great stuff. And in a world where screening tools have really peaked at times and then faded off, FMS, SFMA, like they're using these at high level functioning athletes. I think these tools at the amateur level it's needed. It's necessary. And I think the education piece as well is every opportunity to talk with parents and every opportunity to talk with coaches that are willing to listen about. I don't use the term prevention. I use maybe deterrence or some of these other things where, things are going to happen in sport, but if you're doing things the right way, again, foundationally, and coming back to the why, and you're truly understanding that you don't have to throw a baseball in October, November, December to be better at throwing a baseball in June. Like, you just don't have to do that. Your elbow and your shoulder and your hip and your ankle and all these other things are not going to be happy about that. So there's plenty of other things. So this is great, and it's amazing stuff. And again, I encourage everybody to reach out to Richard with this and get in touch with this project if it's something that sparks interest. We have plenty of therapists and trainers in the US and varied practitioners that work with these amateur age groups. So hopefully, if nothing else, you get a couple of people reaching out with some organizations to enhance these numbers and really generate some more conversations, some more data, and all these other things. Through your time, you have published as an author or co-author, give or take 15 or more articles, right? So this is not a new thing for you. The academic space and publications, you've been at it for a long time, right? And so as you've been doing this, you said back through your undergrad and your master's, you got the taste of academia and research, and that's just stuck with you. Is it something that you still feel as passionate about now? And if so, what drives you? What fuels that fire for you in the research area?
Yeah. It's certainly, it's ebbed and flowed over the years. There's no question about that. It's quite a bit more exciting now because of this new passion and how it relates, as we've just discussed. Right. So that's sparked the flame a little bit more, or turned up the temperature a little bit more. Having some excellent graduate students, makes it a pleasure to do, and makes it easier to do. So there's always kind of looking for the next graduate student. Not that I want to get rid of the ones I've got, but, progress them through the program. Why it sparks interest for me, or still holds passion, is because I think it's necessary for the profession. I think that, not to belittle or it's not the right word I want to use, not to point to other programs, but I think what Concordia does well is bring a research element into it. We've got a couple of excellent researchers in Jeff Dover and Maryse Fortin, who do a lot of interesting work. And I think, what that's able to do is bring some interesting conversations into the classroom. And we give our students an opportunity to participate in research, either in an independent study or in an honors program. And then some of them stick around and do a master's degree with us, or even a PhD. It'd be nice to have, and as a matter of fact, we have some students from some other AT programs in Canada and the United States who have come here for graduate work, which is fantastic. I'm sure Lorianne is doing that as well at York, and they're, Mark is doing it at Mount Royal as well. I'm not sure what some of the other ones are. Trish at Mount, I just shouldn't even bother with names, because I'll probably I'll find someone at every institution. But I think we do that well at Concordia, and I'm sure they do it well at other places as well. And I think that's, to get back to the importance for the profession, I think that's a good thing for the profession, because it keeps us at the forefront. It keeps us at the top of the knowledge game. It keeps us striving for more answers and asking intelligent questions that then we can try to find an answer for. And if we can't find an answer for that, what are we finding an answer for, and how does that relate? And then, ultimately, maybe we get to that answer that we were looking for when we first asked the question. And, I think the great example for me, I think I kind of laugh about. So one of my early students, who back when we had SATs, I was his SAT, Jason Mahalik, who's at the University of North Carolina. Probably everyone knows who he is. Yeah. He's involved in a research group in North Carolina, and so he got the research bug as well. So awesome for him. Anyway, their research team, does a lot with concussions, and they came up with, just by looking at the data, they came up with information that they were able to present to the NFL and actually get a rule changed. Now that sounds kind of like, they got a rule change, like, so what? But it's actually pretty phenomenal, so if we can use our knowledge to progress our profession, to progress the way that we treat people, the way that we assess people, the way that we deal with people, on whatever level of sort of athletic therapy competency, you want to talk about. If we're able to do that, then, we can sort of stand up in the room and be respected. I think it doesn't just take research to do that, of course, but I think that's an important element that leads and helps that respect from other healthcare professions.
100%.
And if we're able to have that information, like Jason and his group in North Carolina, and talk to the stakeholders like the NFL and say, you really ought to change this rule and you'll reduce your concussion rate. You're worried about concussions. This is how you can reduce them. Just change this rule. Right, the kickoff rule, and moved it forward, and now they just kick it through the end zone. It's kind of boring for the game, maybe, I don't know, but like now they have fewer concussions because of it. Like that's an awesome thing. So if we can talk to, athletic directors, coaches, uh, um, administrators, within other sports leagues or CIS sport, other government officials, that work on healthcare, that build parks, in the cities or plan recreation programs within the cities or within the province or federally or whatever the case is. Like I think we can, there's different areas. I'm sort of painting a pretty wide brush here, but like there's a lot of influence that we can have if we've got good information to back up the kinds of things that we say. And so I think the research is important to be able to back up the things that we say, so that when someone comes to me and is presenting about physical injury, say, hey, we can reduce our injuries with this. And I say, really, that's awesome. Tell me how that works. Well, I guess I don't really know exactly how it works, but this is how I think it works. It's like, let me help you study that and let's see if we can figure that out. And in fact, say, yes, check, it does help reduce injury, and then that helps us, like put those programs in place across elementary schools as an example. So I think there's an influence that we can have, and it's going to make our profession better.
Absolutely, and paves the way for those, following in the footsteps, those that are in school right now and finding passion and then having their why already in place because you've paved the way with it and you understand, and the how and you don't have to battle that uphill slope when it's already there for you. So I think it's amazing. And I think we had talked about it with Lorianne, who was on here when we had some time together at York University, and we worked with Jason and well, his wife was heading up a project with UNC, and it was probably in relation to changing some of the rules and looking at sort of how concussion is treated, and then what happens after the fact to identify, what path one should go down with their recovery strategies or whatnot. So some really good stuff and some common ground there. And again, really good work. And the research stuff, I used to be anti-academia, like I'd read the science and understand what I'm doing, but at the same time, like I don't want to read articles, but the articles make a big difference, in getting publications and getting it into people's hands that need it, and then opening doors for athletic therapists, strength and conditioning specialists, whoever, to share the space, the integrative space. And I've done some work as well at York with Alison McPherson, who's an epidemiologist, and she's with Parachute Canada, she's with Hockey Canada, she's with all of the things that you've talked about. She moves into neighborhoods and talks about, where stop signs should be placed based on traffic and what should be one-way streets because of, injury rates and these kinds of things. And those aren't without discussion with athletic therapists and people like this in the background as well. So thank you for all the work you're doing. I think it's hugely important, not only in the Concordia space, but for all of us as practitioners. So really appreciate that. Again, it's session 52 this evening here. Let's Chat, an athletic therapy roundtable with Richard DeMont from Concordia University. You spent 3 terms as the president of the CATA. You and I had a brief discussion about sort of leadership and how maybe the profession has maybe not changed, but the opportunities may have shifted a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about sort of our opportunities as therapists, our opportunities in this integrative space to lead. You've done it with research. What other areas have you identified that we can potentially spark more interest or generate more conversation to continue to puff up our chests a little bit in this profession, pat ourselves, pat each other on the back, and keep this thing and keep the momentum moving forward?
In terms of leadership?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's important. I'm not sure I understand your question fully, but it's important for us to, to be out there and be seen and talk to people, like I think, there's regularly an opportunity to, stand up and be heard, to promote the profession. I'll give you a short example. The other couple of weeks ago, actually, the corporate insurer for Concordia that I belong to by definition of my employment put out a nice little piece. They said, "Hey, find a healthcare professional around you." And so, the kind of guy I am, I was like, okay, well, let's see what healthcare professionals they have on here. Lo and behold, guess what? They didn't have athletic therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this particular insurance company covers athletic therapy. So the person that sent it out from Concordia, I, sent them an email and I'd said, we have an athletic therapy program at Concordia. I'm not sure if you're aware. I'm the program director. I'd be happy to tell you about our program. And you've put out this piece in conjunction with this insurance company, and the insurance company covers athletic therapy, which is fantastic. It's great for all Concordia employees. But the little pamphlet that you put out electronically, where we can click on, find a healthcare provider near you, doesn't actually include athletic therapy. So there seems to be a disconnect there. So, I thought I should point it out to you, and if I can help you some way to improve that, then let me know. And she's like, oh, well, let me call the insurance company, and we went through a process, and they had someone call me and ask me some questions about athletic therapy. And, I don't know that really improves, or, like if they choose then to include athletic therapy on their list of healthcare, then it's awesome. Right. And so if that gets, one more person to know about athletic therapy, and gets one more person in a clinic around here from, one of my former students, or someone else that's, from UQTR or anywhere else, doesn't matter. I don't care. One more person going to see an athletic therapist, then that helps to lift the boat up a little bit. So, like, I don't know whether that's leadership or not, but it's activism, and it's sort of a methodology just to sort of, hey, like, if you see an opportunity to do something, if you can do something, then you should try to do something. Is sort of how I feel about it.
Absolutely, and I think these are the things, and you're leading by example, not only by educating future therapists, but by educating others, around you with the research you're doing, and with that attitude, and all of the things that you've done already, aptitude as well as attitude in terms of approaching this, and I think these are all. Critically important lessons for all of us to understand, and having those conversations makes a difference, not
Yeah.
only here but out into the world. And as we navigate sort of COVID and a pandemic where everything is virtual, maybe these are the times where we can get these conversations into a few more people's hands, and start collaborating a little bit more, and really building some of those bridges and networks, and getting ourselves into some spaces that we may not have been in before. That's kind of part of the angle for this platform. And again, really appreciate you taking the time to be on here. We'll open this up for the next couple minutes here. If anybody has any questions, please feel
Could,
free
could I
to
just
type
could
them
I
in.
just add on to what you said, and
Yes, please.
happy to take questions. You prefaced that with some of my leadership in the CATA, and I think that in this COVID world, I think a lot of the regional associations in the CATA have done a lot to try to advocate to government for us as healthcare providers, and having us, be recognized there, and be in the workplace where it's an essential service, I guess, to have people be seen. And the CATA is an important other leadership component that we have. And part of your question, as I reflected on it, you sort of asked how we've changed a whole lot. And probably one of the ways that we haven't changed that much is in a large amount of growth. And that would be good to see the profession of athletic therapy grow a little bit more. And part of that is the networking that you're talking about. Like, this is a key word that I've used with some of my students, to talk about the networking and how they meet people and how they present themselves to people. And not to be a fatherly figure, but it probably comes across that way, to sort of stand up and be proud and confident of who you are, but tell people what you can do, and sort of to progress. And part of the networking that fits in there, I think, contributes to some of the leadership within the CATA, to sort of be involved at some of that grassroots level, get on a committee for, education, or for certification, or for marketing, or for insurance billing. There's lots of places to be involved in the CATA, or your regional association, that has similar committees to those, and some different ones, and to progress through, so that then you end up being a leader within that association as well, is another good way to practice leadership, to build leadership, to be involved, to network, to get the word out there, in a proactive way. So sorry to jump in on you there, but I thought it was an additional good thing to say.
No, absolutely no need to apologize. I think it is. All of the things have been amazing. This has been very eye-opening. We are 5.5 pages of notes in, and could go on forever. So I really appreciate that. I truly and honestly thank you for all the work that you're doing with all of the students, and again in our profession, and that the groundwork that you have helped and taken part in being active and being a part of that change and developing this for all of us as we continue to sort of, hopefully take the reins and drive this profession forward and into the integrated space where it's recognized more and more on a daily basis. So it is session 52, First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy roundtable with Richard DeMont, brought to you by First Star Therapy and our sponsor, Mobility Tape, the only heat-activated kinesiology tape on the market. Guests coming up to close out 2020. Next Sunday will be Anthony Moore. He's over in the UK as a strength and conditioning specialist with the Leeds Rhinos. That's a rugby club there. He is currently pursuing his PhD as well. Into 2021 for January, we have a couple of students actually across the pond, as they say, a couple of students studying athletic therapy, athletic training in Ireland that will lead us off in 2021. The 10th of February will be Caden Johnson, who is a CFL athlete making the transition over dual with Bobsleigh Canada as well. Pretty interesting story with him. Then the week of the 17th, we'll get Reg Grant on here, who we had touched on a few times through here. And then we'll finish up January with Nikos Apostolopoulos, who has created an amazing system called micro stretching that I would encourage anybody who hasn't heard about it to check out as well. He'll be on here on the 24th of January. But those are our guests for January, not to minimize our guests this evening. Richard, thank you again for carving this time in, for making it a part of my life and our life, and sharing all of your wisdom, all of your knowledge, and I have no doubt that you'll get plenty of interaction once people pick this up, and from those that are here live tonight with the projects that you're working on. I look forward to being in touch in the future as well. So thank you again for being on here.
Thank you for the opportunity to come on. And as I said, you've just put me in humble company again by listing some of your upcoming people. So it's awesome. You're doing good work, and I'm glad you're having these conversations for people to hear. It's great. So thank you very much.
I appreciate it very much, and everybody for being here again. Happy holidays. This is December 20th. We're moving into the season, so enjoy, make the calls, do the online stuff. Tell your brother, tell your sister, tell your uncle, tell your dog. This is First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy roundtable. I'm your host, James Gardner, signing off. Good night. Thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this community. Check us out online, firststartherapy.com. That's FIRSTAR therapy.com. Or email us with feedback, consult@firststartherapy.com, CONSULT@firststartherapy.com, on Instagram @firststar.therapy, and our podcast host @letschat.at. This is First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast.